And right now, I am honored to welcome our first guest to the stage, Bernhard van Lingen. I said around Lengerich, and in fact, I actually specifically practiced before. So thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Let's start with just a quick introduction of who you are.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Yep.
I'm Bernhard van Lengerich, and I grew up as an artisan baker, Dad's Bakery, and then moved on to become a food technologist, did my PhD in Berlin on food and biotechnology, and then joined different companies along the food value chain, and ended up with becoming a chief science officer at General Mills 28 years ago.
Yeah.
Retired 8 years ago, and founded the Seeding the Future Foundation.
Okay.
And the impetus of founding it leads me to tell you a little story about our first visit in Africa.
Okay.
And so a little bit before my retirement, I joined a team trying to learn the food value chain in Sub-Saharan Africa. So we visited Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and we wanted to know how food comes from the farmer to the consumer. And so we visited grocery stores and visited a bunch of farmers. And one farmer we visited, he had a little beehive where he, made honey to sell to get some, income for his family. And he had an extended family of about 25, including, lots of little children. They were malnourished, they were stunted, and they were all happy. And so he was proud showing us his farm. And at the end of the visit, we asked him, if you had one wish, what would it be? And he said, we've got these 2 chickens here who, provide, a couple of eggs a day. And if we would have 2 more chickens for our family, that would be changing our lives. And so that sort of sticks with you. Yeah. And then you fly back to Minneapolis. That's where we live, and flight attendants comes and asks you want another meal or so, and so it formed us quite a bit in establishing our Seeding the Future Foundation, which and we have core beliefs where we say nobody should ever be hungry. Chronic hunger is unacceptable, and we feel that everybody should have access to safe and nutritious food. And that is trusted by the consumer, and that is nutritious and doesn't destroy the earth. Yeah. And so that's where we established our foundation.
Yes.
Future Foundation.
Well, and tell me, backing up a little bit, thinking about your journey in particular, I think what you've hit on is really interesting as we think about taking action and think about learning from what's working and what's not. You worked in sort of a traditional food ecosystem when you were at General Mills.
Yes.
What did you learn during your time there, and how do you pair that with what you see now as the needs based on the solutions you get at Seeding the Future?
So developing healthy food in particular is really not very difficult.
Right.
Developing healthy foods that taste good is more difficult. Most food that really taste great is not necessarily healthy. Most food that is really healthy is really not tasting great. So there's some challenge, but most of the entire food world is working on that. Now, put on top of it, making healthy food taste good and not destroying the earth or being within planetary boundaries is even more difficult. And then comes the consumer, because the consumer needs to trust it, consumer needs to like it, consumer needs to be able to afford it. And so that's where an innovation white space lies. And we made that innovation white space, we call this white space of food innovation, as a core center focus for a Global Food System Challenge, which we launched a few years ago. So we are awarding $1 million a year for innovations in this white space. And surprisingly, we found out most of the most impactful innovations come from the Global South.
Interesting. And 2 points that jump out to me there, this idea of innovation white space. And do we think innovation white space exists can we say that by definition, innovation white space in the food system has impact? Or do you think that there are certain pieces of the innovation white space model that require serving certain markets or require thinking about externalities about the food systems that you've developed? How do you think about that innovation white space and impact more broadly?
The impact question is incredibly important, and it's a big criteria for being selected as top 1%, because many people meet this innovation white space. They might meet one or two, but as long as they don't damage the other or undo another, they are in the game in terms of semifinalists, finalists, winners. But the winners are really the ones who meet this white space plus have a substantial impact. Let me give you an example of impact. The first year we had the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines coming up with a new rice variety that does not pick up arsenic from the groundwater. So you might say, why is that important? Well, there are between 40 and 70 million people at the basin of the Himalaya mountains who are eating rice which is grown with water that is coming from the snowmelt from the Himalaya mountains. Yeah. So you know that the Himalaya that water carries a substantial amount of arsenic into the valley. Yeah. And people who eat that rice, they get diseases, they have acidosis, they die, and having this new rice variety ready to go, germplasm ready to go, ready to commercialize in between 5 and 10 years, affecting 70 million people, that's impact.
Right.
So it's an example of how we assess it, and when we look at impact, we also look at scalability. Right. And so if we have let's say an accelerated composting mechanism in Nepal, it might not be, it's a big deal for a small community. Yeah. But if we can do this across the world, all of a sudden it becomes a big impact. Right. So scaling not only has to do with going from a lab to a gigantic factory, it's also going from a community to 10 communities to 1,000 communities to millions of communities. Right.
Yeah, I'm struck by the story you shared and the idea of 2 chickens as being scale, and equally in many ways as important as a rice variety that can serve hundreds of millions, and thinking about balancing that within the portfolio. Is that something that you all consider when you're awarding prizes or when you're looking for innovations, that sort of depth versus breadth question?
Absolutely. The sourcing of the innovation is really not relevant to us. It can come from across the value chain. Yeah. It can be a crop science innovation. It can be a circular agriculture innovation. Yeah. It can be anything across the value chain, but it needs to enable the production of food for this purpose, to have a societal impact, or it has an environmental impact, or both. Yeah. And I can give you an example of the first prize in the second year. Was an Institute for the Future in Chicago. It's run by a previous ambassador under the Obama administration, and they are running a project in Rwanda where they take city waste, organic city waste, put a black soldier fly. Black soldier flies basically consuming the waste, laying the larvae. The larvae 200-fold its own weight plus protein. Yeah. Feed the larvae to chickens. And the chickens provide protein for the population. The unique part of it is that the motivation behind it was corn and soy are unaffordable for chicken feed. They do not want to feed human food to chickens, so they find different ways. So it's a complete circular mechanism. It's being scaled, it's being financed, and it's a great project. It's these kind of initiatives we highly value.
And when we think about that scale and finance question in particular, one of the things that is unique about what you are doing, and I hope we are part of this continuum, is that the prizes to a certain extent are retrofit or available based on the scale or the stage of the entity. ideally then someone comes to a funder like SIF who's able to support those teams over time. How do you think about that continuum of capital and where there's both weakness and therefore opportunity, and what we're really good at already? How do you think about that?
Yeah. When I look at an investment from a private investment, angel investment perspective, or when we looked at investments from a General Mills perspective, we had the 3-on-1 Inc., which is the investment arm of General Mills. We always look at three things, and this is generally true in the food space. Yeah. Can you make it? Can you sell it? Can you make money on it?
Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. It's that simple.
The more you make, the more you lose. Right. That's not a viable business model. Right. So it needs to be at least at scale. It needs to be visible. Yep. If it's not visible in the first year, okay. If it's not visible in 10 years, not okay.
Right.
And so can you make it doesn't mean you can make it in the lab. Yeah. Can you make it means you can make it in the lab, in the pilot plant, and you can have a reasonable, believable judgment and analysis how you make it at scale, technical, economic analysis, etc. So that means you can make it. Can you sell it? It's important because there is a buyer, which is the consumer. Right. So many people think about the food value chain from farm to fork, but at the end of the chain is the consumer. So material and energy flow essentially goes from farm to fork.
Right.
Money flow goes in opposite direction. Yeah. So if you don't get the consumer buy-in, and we always had a litmus test is, would a mom with 2-3 children buy this food enabled by this technology? So look 10 years, 15 years back. If you were a crop scientist, you developed a GMO material, you would say, wow, this is really cool.
Right.
Now, if they would have asked the consumer first, they would have saved hundreds of millions of dollars in communicating this different or developing something different. So asking the consumer, regardless where people are in the value chain, is important. The first question I would always ask as an investor, did you check with the consumer how they like your idea?
Yeah.
If the consumer is so-so, if 9 out of 10 tell you, I love it, I would buy it, keep going. Okay. If 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 tell you, I don't think it's a good idea. You should rethink what you do. And then can you make money on it? It's probably the less complicated question. Yeah. Because if a techno-economic analysis shows that this can be done at a COGS reasonable in a reasonable time period, then an investment would be absolutely game.
Yeah. Do you think, and this is maybe a provocative question, but do you think it's possible, as we think about, for example, a rice product that doesn't absorb arsenic, do you think that's possible to move through, in the food ecosystem in particular, through the scale process to get to, call it a General Mills, while retaining an impact focus? Do you think that's something that we can hope for?
Yes, actually, I like the determination phrase from the previous speaker.
Yeah.
That is something we absolutely can hope for. I mean, the primary focus of this particular project was not to pick up arsenic and other heavy metals from the ground.
Right.
However, what was not, let's say, part of the discussion, which was part of the thinking, is large parts of the food industry are moving away from rice because of the arsenic content. Large part of the children and baby food manufacturers moving away from rice because of the arsenic content. Right. So having a variety that is arsenic-free is a significant breakthrough, not only for the global south, but for the developed world.
Right.
So when we look at innovations from the global south, they might be focused on global south, but we can also think about what we call reverse innovation. So you take an innovation from a developing region and you apply the insight or the basic concept to a developed region. Like take a company in Kenya, it's called Solar Free. So they take solar panels, put them in a container, add a refrigerating unit on it, and rent this out using the Airbnb model to farmers. Yeah. So farmers have normally between 40 and 80% post-harvest losses. Yeah. Mango, perishable goods, they have enough of it, but it goes bad in a few days. Yeah. So having this model provides food, reduces waste, and provides income. Yeah. And so why not having, this might be a little, left field, but why not having a vertical greenhouse next to each pharmacy in the United States, or particularly in food deserts, where, using a similar model. So there are many cases where we could take a look at, reverse innovation, and then invest in those.
Right. And I think that's intersectionality is a nice moment to maybe take a question from the crowd, and we would love to hear from you. If you don't mind introducing yourself, feel free to share your question.
Thank you. My name is Larry Susskind. I'm on the faculty at MIT, a professor in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. I'm part of the new field called Public Interest Technology, PIT. MIT is one of 66 schools that joined a consortium in the United States of schools committed to developing public interest technology. I very much appreciate the clarity of the presentation that you've made. Questions help to be very clear what the model is. Let me ask whether you considered the possibility of guaranteeing that the prize winners and the technology they're implementing shares the profit that is made by the technology owners with the communities that are using the technology, whose interests keyed the making of the version of the technology that you're supporting. We have many examples in the US of Native American communities, tribes, where energy companies are developing renewable energy on tribal land. There's a law in the US that the developer consult with that community, but that's it. And we have instances in which those renewable energy projects are built and the electricity generated from them goes on wires over the tribal land where they're located at no payment to the community, but to the federal agency. And they don't have any more electricity than they had before. If you were to require that the public interest be served by the advances in technology application that you're supporting, you could require that a percentage ownership of the innovation that's being tested be owned by the community.
It's a really interesting question. Do you have any thoughts on it? Food in particular is such an interesting intersectionality.
I must admit, I misunderstood one word at the early part of the question.
Yes.
So I understand the conflicting situation.
Yep. I think the question, as I understood it, was: do you ever consider, as you find technologies all over the world and fund those technologies, is there some way that your prize winners might structure their financial stacks such that the community was engaged, had some sort of equity in the company itself?
The grants which we give are non-dilutive, and they submit a budget to the selection committee, and if the budget suggests that the community is part of the equity of the social enterprise, there's nothing from a foundation perspective which would prevent that. Right. Absolutely. So.
Well, and that's, I think, a perfect place for us to pause and celebrate the importance of philanthropy as a part of this broader ecosystem, and how the risk-tolerant nature and non-dilutive nature of the work that you're doing within this mature ecosystem, right? We have a food ecosystem, is really important to give time and space to new ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't have a vote in the selection committee. I put myself out, of course, and I even don't ask a question because that might be very manipulative. Okay. But I can hear sometimes the struggle they have with really, really great ideas from for-profit companies in the developed region. Where there's a potential investor base behind them. Right. And then there's another idea which is, from an innovative and novelty perspective, as good, impact, and they always move towards the other side because they say the catalytical effect of the money on the community, on the social impact is really, really important. And so it's a big factor. Included in that is involving ownership from communities.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, you have done my job for me because our next speakers will touch on some of these ideas about how do you fund innovators where there aren't necessarily philanthropists and funders who are behind them to scale some of these ideas. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I love hearing about innovation and thinking about innovating within spaces that exist, and hearing about your work is really inspiring. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm going this way.
We'll go this way.
Okay.